seems like every December in recent years, the same articles are published discussing the relationship between the Christmas tree sitting in the living room and climate change. Some argue plastic trees are better because they can be used for years, and real trees can be directly impacted by a warming planet anyway. Others say that real trees are better since they aren't made of petroleum. Still others say that we shouldn't have a real tree at all. What's the real answer? Arguably, it is more environmentally friendly to not have a Christmas tree at all. After all, the first step is reduce, reuse, recycle. But is it really Christmas without a Christmas tree? Feels a little bit Grinch-like for the most wonderful time of the year. Besides, where would Santa put the presents without a Christmas tree? I know, I ask the hard questions. So instead of going down that route, let's look at the two other options. Artificial tree or real tree? Which one's better for the environment? Let's look at the lifespan of each type of tree from production to disposal so that you can decide for yourself. Most real Christmas trees today are grown on farms. This can create some problems by reducing ecological diversity in the area since they are grown in monocultures. However, in the United States, you could actually get a permit from the US Forest Service to go and cut down your own tree. On the other hand, Christmas tree farms ensure that all tree removal is done in a specific location, which can be more controlled than, say, if everyone decided to cut down their own tree without consideration for the effect it could have on the surrounding environment. There are other considerations to take into account as well, though. Most Christmas trees grow for about 7 years, and during that time, they are absorbing carbon dioxide, a common greenhouse gas, and emitting oxygen. This can mitigate climate change. The downside is that this Christmas tree will be eventually cut down, and depending on what you do with it when you're done with it, can really impact the effect it has on climate change. But before we get there, let's talk about how you get it home. You could go to the farm and get it yourself, in which case the only climate change contribution would be the trip home, since you would most likely have to use a car to do it. A typical passenger vehicle emits about 4.6 metric tons of carbon dioxide per year. So the trip to get that Christmas tree and bring it back is going to contribute to climate change. Alternatively, you could buy your tree from a mass distributor like a gardening store. In that case, the trees were most likely first transferred there on a diesel-powered truck, increasing the climate cost. Medium and heavy-duty trucks in the United States emitted 444 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent in 2019. That's a 90% increase since 1990. Okay, so some sort of way, you have gotten the tree and you have gotten it to your door. Where are we at with this whole carbon cost, carbon footprint for the tree? Well, by the time you get the tree to your door, a real tree has a carbon footprint of 3.5 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent. So that's the same as driving a car about 14 kilometers. But what really matters with the tree is what you do with it once the holiday is over. You could send it to the landfill. In that case, all the carbon that is stored while it was growing will be released as it decomposes, emitting greenhouse gases. Then the carbon footprint jumps to 16 kilograms. Alternatively, you can compost it or recycle it, either yourself if you can do it in your backyard, or at a recycling center that accepts Christmas trees. In that case, it can be turned into mulch or wood chips, and that keeps the carbon footprint closer to 3.5 kilograms. Even better, if you can somehow manage to find a tree that still has the roots on it, and that's definitely not common, you could always just replant it in your backyard if you have one. And in that case, it's just going to continue absorbing carbon dioxide for as long as it lives, which actually will help mitigate climate change. Kind of cool thought, if you can find one that has roots and a place to plant it, but still really cool. Now, Before we move on to talking about artificial trees, there's one more thing we need to talk about with real trees. And that's that they're not immune to climate change. Like all plants and really all living things, they have an ideal environment in which they live. And as the climate warms, it's getting harder to grow Christmas trees. Now, there are some solutions for this. Some farmers are thinking about moving their farms to new places where maybe the trees could survive into the future. But all of this comes at a cost. And here I'm not talking about carbon costs. I'm talking about money. So it's possible that that Christmas tree is going to cost a little bit more in the future, unfortunately. But before we really finish this conversation, we still need to talk about artificial trees. So let's do that. Artificial trees are made of plastic, and plastic comes from petroleum, which comes from the ground and has to be extracted, refined, and then made into an artificial Christmas tree. I've done an entire video on the relationship between plastic pollution and climate change, so make sure to check that one out for more information. But there's really no good news there. A fake tree has a carbon footprint of 40 kilograms just based on production. That doesn't even take into account shipping costs, which are a lot. How does the Christmas tree get from the store where you bought it or the warehouse that stores it until you order it online? How does it get there? Where do they come from? Most likely the tree was made overseas if you live in the United States, which means it got to the country on a container ship. And container ships cause 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions. In 2015, that meant 298 million tons of greenhouse gases. And that's just getting the Christmas tree to the port. They still have to get to the warehouse or store in a diesel-powered truck. How does an artificial tree get to your door? Like the real tree, it would contribute to climate change in the trip from the purchase site to your home because you will, most likely, have to use a car to do it. Once an artificial tree is home, it's there, right? That's the whole point of the artificial tree. You don't have to keep buying it. And so in theory, if you hold on to it long enough, then it would have a lower carbon footprint than a real tree that you would have to keep buying year after year after year, particularly if you're just throwing out the real tree. But how long do you have to hold on to it for? There are different estimates out there, but most of the literature suggests somewhere between 10 and 12 years. You have to hold on to that tree for that long to have it start being more equal to the cost, carbon cost, that is, of a real tree. But what about once it's done? It's really unlikely you would hold on to that tree for forever. The process of taking it in and out of the box, exposure to sunlight through a window, all of these things could take its toll on the artificial tree over time. What do you do with it then? If you can figure out a way to repurpose that artificial tree, more power to you. I've been racking my brain and I couldn't really come up with any useful options. But what if you can't do that? Well, then the tree just goes to a landfill, right? It can't be recycled. It's made of too many different types of plastics, and a lot of those plastics can't be recycled. So it's in a landfill, filling it up, and potentially, depending on how the tree was made, leaking maybe harmful chemicals into the environment. Yeah. So let's sum it all up. Artificial trees have a much higher carbon cost until you get it home than real trees. The hard part is then it depends on what you decide to do with the trees. How long are you holding on to the artificial tree for? And what are you doing with it once the holiday season is over? Depending on your answers to those questions, if you think you can hold on to an artificial tree for 20, 30, 40 years, or maybe you like to compost and so you can just throw your real tree in a compost pile, that's going to affect whether it's more environmentally friendly to get a real versus artificial tree. So the answer is really up to you. What's most environmentally friendly for you?